Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Tonight we present a special interview with former leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party, John Tory. He was born into a family of privilege in Toronto. His father was a highly regarded, well-respected lawyer here in the city, but Tory himself developed an early and abiding love for politics. He joined the Young Progressive Conservatives at the age of 14. He became Chief of Staff to Premier Bill Davis at the age of 26. He ran election campaigns for various prime ministers, including Brian Mulroney and Kim Campbell. And then he decided to run himself. He ran to be Mayor of Toronto, he ran to be Premier of Ontario, and John Tory now joins me to talk all about life beyond politics. John Tory, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Nice to be here. Nice to be beyond politics, too, sometimes.
Yeah, you might mean that in a very broad sense.
Literally, yeah, exactly. Yes, that's right.
You know, I was struck by the fact that you joined the Young Progressive Conservatives when you were 14 years old. Is that right?
I did.
14?
And it was one of those things, Catherine, as you know, that a lot of people end up joining political parties. I mean, how many could say they join a political party for ideological reasons or on some policy issue at age 14? In my case, I was standing by the locker at my high school, my locker,
right.
And a classmate came up to me and said, "We're having a party on Friday night, and you have to join the YPCs for $1 in order to come." Handed over the $1, and I've now been 40 plus years, as doing
so
just about every job.
Comes out.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people end up in politics that way for social reasons, or because somebody asks them to join.
Yeah.
But it's become a hugely important part of my life. Obviously, still is. But I think a lot of people join that way.
So you're a party animal in the truest sense of the word.
That's right.
Both for the party.
Every sense. Well, no, most people would say I'm not a party animal anymore in the social sense. I'm too old for that. I'm a grandfather now.
So you came from a family that was very prominent in Toronto.
Liberals too, I should tell you.
Oh, that I didn't know.
My great uncle was a Liberal finance minister in Nova Scotia, and then received a patronage appointment as lieutenant governor of that province.
My
Liberals.
Goodness.
I've said it's the only blemish on his resume, which otherwise is stellar.
Do you think he'd be rolling over in his grave?
No, I don't think so, because I think that it's about values, I think, and I think if you looked at the values, and I've read some of his old speeches that were delivered literally in the early 20th century, and I think he was in that tradition of Canada that Liberals and Progressive Conservatives had some differences, but the core values that they believed in terms of looking after each other and those kinds of things were there. So I don't think he'd be bothered any more than I'm bothered that he was a Liberal.
So tell me about your parents, because your dad was a prominent lawyer, started what remains a very successful firm. Your mom raised 4 children. What was it like to grow up in that type of an atmosphere?
Well, it was very comfortable, so I will say that. People have made jokes over the years about me growing up with a silver spoon in my mouth, and in the end, you can use that expression if you want. I always think those kinds of things aren't very constructive, but I grew up in a comfortable professional family. My father was a hardworking lawyer. He became a business executive. My mother was a hugely active, community volunteer and mother of 4, and she did most of the work on all of that. So my father would be the first to say that if he was still alive. But most of all, what I saw from them were 2 things. One is this constant kind of repetition of good, solid values, and you'll be able to tell I've mentioned it 2 times in 5 minutes. That I just believe that's at the core of being, good and credible and accomplished in politics and in business and in life. And then the second thing they gave was a huge example of getting involved and trying to make a difference. And it's almost more so in your personal life, your volunteer life, your community life, than in your professional life. And they both emphasized to all of us, the 4 of us, do whatever you do. Choose to do whatever you want to do. My father put no pressure on me to become a lawyer, though I did go to law school and become a lawyer. But just do it well, and make sure to always set aside some time to give back to the community, because you're lucky. Whatever you end up doing, you're lucky. And so that's lived within me my whole life, and as I'm trying to do, and Barb and I with our own children.
Was law dull? Was it too dull for you?
I don't want to say dull, because I find almost anything interesting. I mean, I've been lucky enough to have literally almost 5 entirely different careers, and I haven't found any of them dull. Politics, my mentor and friend Bill Davis once said that sort of the dullest day you have in politics is more interesting than the most exciting day you'll have in, I forget whether he was talking law or business. Anything.
Yeah.
There's an electricity to politics. I now do a talk show. Mm-hmm. There's an electricity to that because it changes every hour. Sure. You don't know who's going to call in and say what. Right. Some guest may say something controversial. Yeah. It is an immediacy. So I don't want to say law was dull, no. And what I enjoy about everything I've done, when you look back, what you enjoy is not so much the work you're doing, but the people you're working with and the things you're working on. And so I worked with great people in law and worked on some very interesting things. So it made it interesting. Politics the same way, the media and the talk show the same way. And so I know it wasn't dull, but it certainly it doesn't have that sort of electricity, that almost that kind of nuclear energy that politics has that I don't think you can find anywhere else.
You just mentioned Premier Davis. You were in your mid-20s when you left law to become his chief of staff. Mm-hmm. I actually found a quote from your grandmother that I'm sure you've heard before, but she said, "What useful advice could John possibly give?"
She phoned me to say that.
Premier Davis.
It was on the radio. I think I don't know what shocked her more, the fact that any job I would take at age 26 would be on the radio and would be deemed worthy of being on the radio. But then she followed that up by saying, "Well, I heard this on the radio. Was there some mistake or something?" And then she said, and she was a wonderful, highly intelligent, but very, oh yes, absolutely. And it runs in the family. I mean, my mother is this way too. But she said to me, I've shortened it now to be, "Why would he want your advice?" And look, I was lucky. I mean, I was given a chance to do that job. And in some respects, when I left that job, when I retired from it at age 30, I was thinking I would never have a better job than that was more interesting. But as I was saying a moment ago, it turns out that I think you sort of make your own interesting times. And so in different fields, I've been as interested as I was in that job. But what a great privilege to be given. And I remember when I would walk into meetings there wouldn't be anybody that wouldn't be, less than 20 years older than me. And I was in a position of some influence in those meetings and authority. But I think if you listen, if you behave yourself in terms of not pretending or acting like you think you're any more important than anybody else in the room, because you're not, and you sort of act in a responsible manner, that those things can work out fine. What does age have to do with it? Any more so than if somebody was 85 sitting doing a job like that, somebody might say, well, they're way too old.
Except that when you're young, people immediately doubt your abilities. And so you
have to prove yourself.
And you would have had to do that day in and day out, not just with other staff members, but with cabinet ministers.
Yep.
Obviously, you had the confidence of the Premier.
Yep.
But
which helps a lot.
It does.
But if you treat people, Catherine, with respect, and you listen to them, and you don't sort of hold over them the fact that you've got this job where somehow you can make their life difficult, then I think people will give you a chance. And that's all you need. I mean, you need the chance to prove yourself. You still have to prove yourself, but you're given the chance if you treat people respectfully. And I've always felt that, people in public life, I mean, whether they're MPs, ministers, opposition leaders, should be treated with respect. And one of the things that really bothers me about what's going on today is that they all treat each other with such disrespect. They think it's part of the process that you sort of have to engage in character assassination in order to sort of be seen to be successful. And I never did that, and it's maybe why I'm sitting here today talking to you about a life beyond politics.
Well, that raises a really interesting point, because how many times have I heard it said of someone, oh, they're too nice, or they were too nice to be in politics? You are regularly spoken of in terms of someone who's friendly and who is kind and who is compassionate to other people, that you are a nice person. But did those qualities help you at all in your own political career?
You know how they helped me? I have friendships today that I made with groups that I only met as a politician, where you're out at these different events you go to, and you wouldn't otherwise be there if you weren't in public life. And those friendships endure because those people knew that my friendship with them was genuine, and I continue to go to their events and see them because I actually care about them. I don't need their vote anymore because I'm not running for anything.
Right.
And so it helps you there. Otherwise, I'd have to be honest with you and tell you it doesn't really help you. I think there's a degree of ruthlessness that you have to have that maybe wasn't a big part of my DNA. I mean, I can make tough decisions if I have to, and I can be tough with people if I have to, but it isn't my sort of core default position, and I think it hurts you. I think, if you look at the people who've sort of done well in what is a very tumultuous business, they're often people who were better at that sort of thing than me, and that's fine. I get up and look myself in the mirror every morning, and that's the person you always see first. And I'm very happy with what I see, just in the sense that if I wasn't as ruthless as I needed to be successful, that's life. You are who you are. Because I think the worst thing you can do is try to pretend to be something you're not. I mean, because then sometimes I think you forget who it is you're trying to be, and you just got to be true to yourself.
Tell me about your family's reaction to your decision to go into politics per se, to leave law, to go to Premier Davis. And then what followed was a very long career helping other politicians and being a candidate yourself. How did your family react?
It's a very interesting question you should ask me.
Other than your grandmother.
No, my grandmother, they were all fine. But you know what? I wouldn't have been able to answer the question as completely as when my father died, I went down to his office because somebody had to go and clean out all his papers. Yeah. And one of the things that I had said that got quite a bit of attention when he died was that he'd written us a letter every Christmas, all 4 of his children. And it was
individually?
Yes, and we called it a bit of a report card, because he'd always said in the letter a little bit about what he and my mom had done that year, a little bit about something he thought we'd done that was good, some accomplishment, and a little bit of advice that might have been from something we'd done that wasn't so good, that didn't work out so well. And I found a letter from 12 years before I ran for public office. I first ran for mayor of Toronto. It was the first time I'd sought office myself, in 2003. And in this letter, written 12 years earlier at Christmas, he'd said to me, because I'd already been involved since I was 14 in politics, he said, "Well, I'm very glad you continue to be involved in politics. I hope you never run for public office, because I think the opportunities to compromise yourself and to compromise your integrity are so frequent, and I wouldn't want to see you put in that position. Not that I think you would, but I just wouldn't want to see you put in that position." And it's funny, I kept his letters, but I hadn't gone back and reread them all. And then I read this one, and I thought to myself, isn't that interesting? He would have written that to me. And I think when I did run, he knew it was kind of an inevitability, as did my mom, as did my grandmothers, because I'd spent so much time helping other people that it was natural that I would think about it. But I think I could always tell he sort of thought to himself, well, I just as soon he wasn't doing this, because he also thought it was a very tough life in terms of the kind of nastiness we were discussing earlier. He just couldn't get that. And nor could my mom. I mean, they were people who sort of thought, well, you can get done what you need to get done in business or law or charitable work or politics,
all of which
without being nasty.
You were very successful at. I mean, you had an extremely successful business career.
Sure.
You were extremely involved in charitable initiatives.
And my political career wasn't so successful. I mean, I became the leader of my party, which was an honor and a privilege, and was an accomplishment. I got elected to the legislature, but I had other losses. Even my mayoralty campaign was actually a great success, in that I came from being a complete unknown to almost winning. But almost winning, there is no silver medal. No, there's no silver medal. Yeah. But having said that, my political career can't be described as an overwhelming success, because I didn't make it to be either the mayor or the premier, the 2 jobs that I sought. But in the end, I mean, maybe this is, how people rationalize these things. So I'll put that on the table, and the viewers will decide. I know I can get up in the morning and look myself in the mirror and know that my integrity was never called into question, and it never will be, because my political career is done. And that people do look at me and say he was honest, and he was sincere, and he was genuine and authentic, and didn't engage in character assassination. And you know what? If they say all those things about me, that I sort of tried my best and tried to keep the public interest in mind, I'm very comfortable with that. I mean, I wish I'd had the chance to be the mayor of Toronto or the premier of Ontario, because I have things that I would like to have tried to do, and some particularly values, especially that have to do with the fact you can combine a well-run government and a conservatively managed economy with helping other people, which to me is what Canada's all about. But I didn't get that chance, so you do it other ways. You do it through your community activity and in business, and even through a talk show. You can sit there and spout off your views about things, and it's a good platform.
I think the thing about a defeat, though, is that there is a sense of exhaustion, but also a sense of sadness about the possibilities that could have been and now never will be. And I wonder how you, as a person, got through the defeats without feeling bitter or feeling angry, or whether you did feel bitter and angry, and how you overcame that.
No, I was disappointed in some people who, in politics there's always that side of things that doesn't get that much attention, which is the people who sort of let you down, and you feel disappointed about that. And I was just disappointed that I didn't have the chance to kind of to show what I think I could do in terms of putting into action those values that I talked about. But no, I wasn't bitter because, first of all, I'm sort of one of those people who says, well, what does bitterness and anger get you anyway?
Right.
It gets you all wound up and maybe get your family wound up, but
Right.
what does it achieve? The answer is nothing. I was once asked by one of my young assistants when I was the leader, we were driving along in the car on one of those endless trips you're taking around Ontario, who are the people that you really hate? That's exactly the word he used, in politics. And I said, you know what? I can honestly tell you, I don't hate anybody. Like, I just don't. It's not in me, to hate anybody, because I sort of figure I just don't feel that way, but why would you exert emotional energy to hate anybody anyway? And so I guess I got busy almost after I was defeated and left politics and said, fine, that's the cards that I've been dealt, and that maybe I even had dealt myself because I made some mistakes. And I'll just move on to sort of try to make as much of a contribution as I can doing other things. And, why would you want to sit around and feel sorry for yourself or feel angry at other people when you could go and, get your life going again in another direction, but trying to do the same things,
Sure.
Trying to help people who need help and trying to build a sort of better, more civilized, fairer society in your city or in your country. Mm-hmm. There's lots of ways you can do that. Only a fraction of people end up going into politics anyway.
Yeah. I want to just take a step back because I was interested in the difference for you between being the backroom strategist who ran challenging, difficult, fascinating campaigns for people like Brian Mulroney and Kim Campbell and a variety of other public figures, and then becoming the candidate yourself. What was the difference for you between the backroom stuff and the candidacy?
I tell the story only half in jest about the fact that it sure was easier to stand behind the door of some office, whether it was your father's or somebody else, and say, well, here's what you should say, and here's exactly how you should handle this, and whatever you do, don't get flustered, and so on. And then you'd open the door and kind of push them out in front of all the cameras and close the door and wish them good luck. And you'd stay behind the door, and no matter what happened, you were out of sight, and you weren't,
Right.
And then all of a sudden, I was the guy that's saying, well, here's what you're supposed to say, and you go out there and just do that, and good luck, and they'd push you out the door and close it behind you. And, I guess fortunately, because I'd been on the other side of it, I sort of knew both, to some extent, what the job of the sort of the leader or the front person was and the other job. And I still think among those, what it has given me now, if I was ever to run somebody else's campaign again,
Would you?
Well, I would, sure. But I think it's a young person's business, and so I'm probably past it. But I would certainly understand now a little better when you give that guy the shove or that woman the shove out the door and close the door behind them and say good luck, that it is not a simple proposition to be the one that's standing there on the firing line, having to choose the right words, have the right expression on your face, not make a mistake, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so I think it would make me a better person. But I've also said, for example, I think I'd be a much better politician today because I've now done a talk show. Why? Well, because on a talk show, you're no good if you don't have an opinion. And in politics, I sort of thought my classical training was that you're supposed to sort of always couch what you say on the basis that you don't want to get yourself in too much trouble, especially if you're in the opposition. But even if you're in government, you're careful. Well, I would be less careful today because I think what's missing in politics today is that people are not being honest with the voters and sort of saying, look, there's some real messes that we've got to clean up, and here's what the mess is, and here are the alternatives to clean it up, and none of them are very palatable. There's no free or easy way to fix this. And it's that kind of caution that politicians have that say, well, you can't possibly say anything somebody might not like because you won't get elected.
Right.
And so
but
I think
that's true.
Out of every experience
Isn't
comes,
it?
oh yeah.
Isn't it true?
What's a sad truth?
Yeah.
So you don't get honesty from anybody. I'm not making that in any kind of a partisan way. And nobody feels there's any premium on being honest. And so people they're not dishonest in terms of lying, but they tell as little of the truth as they can in terms of some of the messy stuff. The future of our healthcare system, the real financial state of the country, the state of our pension programs. You could go on down along. The Aboriginal communities and what's going on there. Nobody really surfaces the truth and says, hey, give yourself a shake and ask yourself if you would accept this, if you knew that was the truth. And I think the public wouldn't. So every one of these chapters is a learning experience. And I learned from being a candidate a lot more about that would make me a better campaign manager, a more considerate campaign manager. But it sure is different, to be the one that they're sort of saying, or when you're standing in that studio about to have a debate with the other leaders, and it's just you and the other two leaders in the case of Ontario, and 3 TV cameras and the moderator, it's a lot different than the coaching you do where you say, well, whatever you do now, don't say this or don't do that.
Sure.
And it's different to be the one that's there, given your head filled with all these instructions about how to make sure you win.
Is that what changed your decision about running again in the mayoralty race in 2010?
No, I think it was more so just that I was sort of having fun doing what I was doing, and
Which was the radio show.
the broadcasting, and I'm on some corporate boards, and I'm doing all this community work. And, to be honest, I didn't want to lose again, not because of losing being a badge of dishonor or it's a bad thing, but it was almost as much for the team of people that would have been assembled. I didn't want to go through another exercise where they were all let down and so on. And I didn't know that I was going to lose. I mean, obviously, if I had done this, the prospects looked good. All these polls, and everybody was all excited and saying I just had to run and so forth. But I just sort of thought to myself, if I'm ever going to do this again, it's going to be done in a sort of careful, considered manner. And I just thought the way I could contribute to the welfare of my city and the place I live at that time was better outside of politics than inside. And so I just said no, which was hard in a way.
I bet.
But you have to do these things based on what you think is the right decision, and you can't look back and start second-guessing yourself. People come up to me. It's quite funny. People come up all the time in the street and say, oh, you should have run, you would have won and all this sort of thing. And then, of course, they will tell you that in every election you ever ran in, they voted for you.
Of course.
Now,
and
if this was actually true,
person.
I would have won massive wins to be mayor of Toronto and then served a couple of terms as premier and would now be retired from politics for other reasons, discussing this with you.
I know.
But they mean well. I mean, they're well-intentioned, but they clearly didn't vote for me, but they sort of like to think they did or pretend they did or something.
Rose-colored
People
glasses.
are very kind.
Let's talk about your wife, Barbara Tory.
Oh, she's a spark plug. I mean, and she is... People actually should have elected her. But if they'd elected me, what they didn't realize they got was the bonus plan, because she would have been so interesting, and because she's very much like your mother in that she's very much her own person. She was not any, she was no creation or appendage or anything. I mean, she'd be offended at any of those words deeply. She was very much her own person, and she said things I wouldn't say because I was being the careful politician. And if the press had learned about going to her more often, and they would have got a much more colorful sort of time. Even I might have got elected.
Did you worry about that?
No, a little bit. But I mean, what I knew is that they sort of knew what she was about, and they just knew she was a strong, intelligent, feisty woman who was very conscious of the fact that she wasn't going to say anything deliberately to get me in trouble, but also was going to have her own opinion. I mean, there's the best story about her that's still written about from time to time when they write about me is we were in the Gay Pride Parade one year, the first year I think I was in it, which was years ago, and I've been in it many times with her. And somebody came up with a television camera and said, and interviewed her and said, well, isn't this odd that your husband would be in the Gay Pride Parade? And she said, why do you think it's odd? And well, he's a conservative. And she said, well, no, he's a strong supporter of gay rights. I don't have any idea why you'd be surprised he'd be here. There are lots of conservatives who, support gay rights. And then the guy said to her, and it was right at the time when the same-sex marriage issue was very current, well, what about same-sex marriage? Surely he's got a problem with that. And she said, none whatsoever. And they said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, we've been married at that time. We've been married for 29 years, and we've had the same sex that whole time. So, of course, and this was her way of diffusing the issue. And, of course, the guy was just staring at her. He didn't know idea what to say. And, of course, I'm standing beside her, walking along the parade, thinking, I can't believe she just said that. But ever since, when they've written that story up, and it's been sort of repeated over and over again, people think, well, good for her for kind of dismissing this silliness about people being pigeonholed. If you're a conservative, therefore you don't support gay rights or whatever. That was her way of dealing with it. I mean, she dealt with it in a funny way as opposed to saying, why do you insist on stereotyping conservatives as being anti-gay or anti-this or whatever? That was her way of dealing with it, with a sense of humor, and it took the reporter a minute to figure out what she just sort of said.
Where did you meet?
We met, it's one of those things, I was talking about this the other day on the talk show in the context of mixed marriages that are now becoming much more prevalent in this country, as they will, between religions and ethnic groups. And I was saying, the chances of somebody ending up marrying in this country today somebody who's just like them are so small. And I said, no different than Barb and I, who were in the same French class. In my case, I was trying to improve my high school French because I knew that in politics and just in Canada it was an asset. So I did it while I was going to law school. She took it for some similar sort of reason. We both happened to sit down next to each other in the classroom on the first day of the class. By the way, she having come to that class with her fiancé, my having come with my girlfriend. But we decided wisely, or maybe unwisely, that the girlfriend and fiancé would sit elsewhere in the room. Oh. She and I happened to sit in these two seats next to each other in the classroom. And almost 34 years later, we're married and have 4 children and 2 grandchildren. And it's been a great marriage. I mean, and that she's made up. I mean, I am very conservative in the way I sort of speak, although a little less so now that I'm a talk show host. And I'm less of a party animal, back to where we started. She's quite the opposite, but it works well for us. And she's been a wonderful mother to our kids, and now a great, she's not a great grandmother, but she's a terrific grandmother.
Yes.
And,
although that's probably a difficult term to swallow, even though you're delighted to see the children, when you're a young grandmother, I think that's...
No, I don't think, she takes huge pleasure in it.
Does she?
Yeah, and the fact that she looks young and is relatively young as a grandmother is to her a pleasure, and I think a lot of her friends are, sort of envious at the fact we're having the experience now. They will have it eventually, but they're just, we're really the first among all our friends, and it's great.
You almost lost her in the early 90s. She was very, very ill. How did that impact your family life?
I don't know. I mean, it's funny because it impacted me in some very practical ways in terms of my attitude, for example, towards nurses, because when she was so sick, and they told us she had which turned out to be incorrect, but they told us that she had a terminal form of cancer, and
oh my gosh, how awful!
Yeah, well, it was the best they were doing. Doctors do what they do, and they do it well. And we have a daughter who's now a doctor, and it's an imprecise science. Much as we think they've got the answers to everything. So my attitude towards nurses was formed at that time because I just saw what they did in terms of caring for her, and she was weeks and weeks in the hospital. There's nothing like coming face to face with losing somebody like that causes you to, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to sit here and say, well, it strengthened our relationship and so on. It probably did, but I don't make up those kinds of things. It just changes your perspective when you're, just as my father's death, it was the first someone who actually had died that was so important in my life that it's a searing experience. I won't take away from that. I mean, it only happened months ago, and it was a searing experience and still is for me. I went to see that movie Descendants with George Clooney in it, and a lot of that movie has to do with him having his wife on life support. And I mean, the tears were just streaming down my face as I thought about being in that same room with my dad. And so when they're telling my wife, and we're both still quite young, we're in our mid-30s, is got this terrible form of cancer, and she was totally paralyzed. She couldn't even open and close her eyes. I had to close her eyes, so it was a searing experience. But it I don't know. It teaches you a lot, as a lot of bad experiences do, about life and about the important things. And I'm not sure I shaped up much in terms of spending less time at the office, but it does teach you about some of those things. And thank God, thanks to the good care she got and so on, and that it was a different diagnosis. She had something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which manifests itself in a terrible sort of way with paralysis and terrible pain and so forth. But she's 100% today, 110. But I think you sort of, somehow it changes you as a person, and I just can't tell you how it changed me, but I know it did.
Are you done with politics?
Well, I don't, one thing that I think is wise not to say is never, or that you're done, because if somebody came along and there was the right opportunity. But now Barb, speaking of her, people meet us on the street and say, you must run again, and she says, that's not happening, and she kind of pulls me along down the sidewalk.
That's a familiar refrain from a wife.
But, I sort of think that I've probably moved on from that, but we'll see. I'm 50, in my late 50s. I am a grandfather. I'm enjoying all that. I'm very much enjoying what I'm doing, which is a combination of sort of the business, the broadcasting, the community work. So if you're happy with your life, then why change it? But
sure.
I've sort of changed careers every 5 years, not by plan, but just by happenstance, because somebody came along and said, wouldn't you find this interesting? And so who knows? But I tend to think, that I've spent some time in public life and it was interesting, and, but we'll see.
Well, we'll watch with interest.
Another of those classic non-answers that I try not to give anymore.
That you're training yourself not to give.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I'll give it on that just because you're unwise to give a definitive answer. Exactly.
Thank you for being here. It's been a real pleasure to
Thank
chat with you.
me too. Thank you, Catherine.